Montana Territory, October 1871. The girl stumbled out of the trees just before dusk, barefoot, bleeding, and half-conscious. Her dress torn at the hem and her eyes wide like some wild animal too long hunted. She made it no farther than 10 paces into the clearing before she collapsed. A sap porter had just finished tying down the last of his pack mule's load when he saw her fall. He dropped the rope and ran. She was breathing, but barely. Dirt clung to her cheeks, and her lips were cracked from thirst. Her hands were scraped raw like she had crawled a long way. She looked no older than 20, with dark hair tangled down her back and a bruise rising on her cheekbone. Assad did not ask her what happened. He carried her to the fire, set her down in the patch of warmth just beyond the flames. He covered her with his coat. Then he built the fire higher, fed it dry pine and cedar until it burned hot and steady. She woke later, just past nightfall. She blinked slowly, eyes tracking the low, burning fire, then him. "You are safe," Assad said, voice quiet. "You can sleep. I will watch tonight." She stared, throat working like she wanted to speak but did not know how. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away fast. Then she turned her face toward the fire and closed her eyes. Assad did not sleep. He sat with his rifle across his lap and the fire at his side, watching the tree line. Once, deep in the dark, a coyote called out, but nothing stirred beyond that. The night passed slow and silent. By the time morning came, frost had touched the grass and the girl was curled tight beneath his coat, shivering. He boiled coffee. When she stirred, he offered her the tin cup. Her fingers trembled as she took it. "Name's Assad," he said. She nodded slowly, cautious. "Selene." Her voice was soft, cracked at the edges. "Selene Thorne," he nodded once. "All right, Selene." She looked around then, eyes jumping from the mule to the fire to the hills behind them. "Where are we?" "About 10 miles west of Fort Benton." "You walked out of the woods east of here last night. Do not know how far you came." Selene's eyes dropped. Her hands clenched around the tin cup. Assad let the silence hang. She did not explain what happened. He did not ask. Instead, he made her eat. Caught a rabbit before noon and cooked it over the fire. Watched her eat slow, bite by bite, like she did not quite believe it was real. She had bruises on her arms, too. Fading but deep. The kind that came from being grabbed hard and held. That night she slept again. This time she rolled toward the fire on her own without needing to be told. Assad sat in the same place as before. Rifle on his lap, fire at his side. He watched. On the third morning she asked, "You live out here?" "Mostly. Sometimes near the Missouri. Sometimes farther north." "Why?" He shrugged. "No one out here tells you what to do." Selene looked down at her hands. "That sounds nice." They stayed 3 more nights in that place, letting her rest. Her color came back slow. When she was strong enough to walk, Assad helped her down to the river to wash and let her hair out of its tangled braid. She came back from the water different. Still quiet, but straighter in the spine. That night, she sat next to him by the fire instead of across from him. "I had 2 children," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "A boy and a girl. They were taken from me." Her throat tightened. "I do not even know where." He looked at her, steady and sure. "I will help you find them." Her eyes filled again. This time she let the tears fall. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. That was the first time she touched him. The next morning they packed camp. Assad adjusted his saddle and gave her his horse. He took the mule. "Where are we going?" Selene asked. "Fort Benton first. Supply, maybe ask some questions." "Then we go wherever we have to," she nodded. "All right." They rode out side by side. She still did not say all that had been done to her. He never asked, but every night he lit a fire, and every night he said, "Sleep. I will watch tonight," and she did. The trail into Fort Benton was narrow and rutted, lined with cottonwoods losing their last yellow leaves. Wind blew sharp off the river, and the town unfolded slow from the rise flat-roofed buildings, smoke curling from chimneys, and the quiet hum of life settling in for winter. Assad dismounted first, tying the mule outside the general store. Selene eased down from the saddle without asking for help. Her steps were steadier now, though she still favored her left foot. Inside, the scent of kerosene and cured leather hung heavy. Shelves were lined with dry goods and tools, tins of peaches, bolts of coarse fabric. An older man behind the counter looked up, eyes narrowing with recognition. "Haven't seen you since spring roundup," the man said. "Need supplies," Assad said. "And names." The man's gaze flicked to Selene, then back to Assad. "What kind of names?" "Folk passing through with children. A boy and a girl, young. That covers half the wagons headed north. Then start with the ones that didn't make it." The man sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. 3 wagons came in last week from Helena. One had 2 little ones. Man claimed them as kin. Didn't catch the name, but they bought winter coats and sugar. Headed east, might be aiming for Fort Union. Assad laid coin on the counter. "Pack us flour, beans, salt pork." 2 wool blankets. Selene wandered to the back of the store. Her fingers brushed over a folded shawl, deep red with black fringe. She didn't pick it up. Outside, Assad checked the cinch on the mule while she stood watching the street. A freight wagon rattled past, and a child leaned out the back, face smeared with jam. Selene didn't blink. Assad handed her a wrapped biscuit from his coat pocket. "We leave at first light," she nodded, chewing slow. "What's east of here?" "Cold country. Empty country. But if someone's hiding, it'd do." They took a room above the livery. The walls were thin and the mattress sagged, but it was warm. Selene sat on the edge of the bed, watching Assad set his rifle within reach. "I used to sew dresses," she said, voice low. "My sister and I had a shop in St. Louis. I was 15 when we opened it. Folks said we'd never make it. What happened?" "She married a banker. I married a man who wanted land." Assad sat on the floor, back to the wall. "Did he ever love you?" She looked down at her hands. "He loved what I gave him. I don't think he ever saw me when I wasn't quiet." The wind pressed against the window pane. Assad reached for another log and fed the stove. "You ever miss it?" he asked. "The city. I miss the way it smelled after rain and gaslight in the windows at night." She glanced at him. "But I don't miss feeling small." Neither spoke after that. When she lay down, he stayed where he was, rifle across his knees, eyes on the door. Just before sleep took her, she whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer. Outside, snow began to fall, thin and quiet. The wind rode hard through the breaks east of Fort Benton, carrying with it a sting that settled deep in the joints. They rode slow through it, bundled in wool and dust, flanked by barren hills and cottonwoods gone bare. No sign of frostbite yet, but Selene's hands stayed red and stiff on the reins. She didn't complain. 3 days out, they came across the remnants of a wagon camp, ashes half buried under snow, boot tracks frozen into the mud, a child's ribbon snagged on a sage branch. Assad crouched low, brushing away the crusted earth near the fire pit. The coals were long cold. "They didn't linger," he said. Selene knelt beside him, her breath fogging the air. "How far ahead?" 2, maybe 3 days, if they slowed for weather less. She took the ribbon without a word, folded it into her coat pocket, and stood. That night, they camped in a dry wash shielded from the wind. Assad dug out a shallow pit for the fire, banked it with stones, and let it burn low to keep the glow hidden. Selene sat beside it, her knees drawn up, fingers wrapped around a tin cup of boiled chicory. Her voice came rough from the cold. "I grew up near the Mississippi. My father worked barges, then took to preaching when his lungs gave out. Thought he could save the world shouting from a pulpit. He kept his eyes on the fire, listening. I used to sing at revival meetings, Thought that counted for something back then. Thought maybe it made me good. Assass stirred the coals with a stick. You don't owe goodness to anybody. She looked at him, studying the lines that weather had etched into his face. You ever lose someone, he nodded once. Brother died in Kansas. Got caught in a quarrel that wasn't his. Did you go after the man who did it? No, wasn't just one man, was the whole mess of it. Selene let that settle. Then, sometimes I think about what I'd do if I saw him again, the one who took them. My hands go numb just picturing it. You'll see them first, Assass said. That's what matters. Later, when the fire had burned down to a soft orange hush, she wrapped herself in the new blanket and lay close enough that he could hear her breathing. She didn't ask if he'd keep watch. She knew he would. At dawn, they pushed on. By midday, they reached the edge of a small trading post strung with old flags and rough signage. A one-room chapel stood off to the side, its steeple leaning west like it had grown tired of standing straight. A man in a buffalo coat stepped out of the mercantile when they arrived, squinting against the glare. You just missed the wagon train, he said, eyeing their dust. Passed through 2 nights back, headed toward Milk River. Assass cut a glance toward Selene. She gave a small nod. Did they have children with them? Assass asked. The man scratched his beard. 2 of them, I think, little ones, quiet. The man said he was their uncle, looked nervous. You hear a name? No, but he paid in coin, not script. That stuck out. Inside the store, Assass traded for fresh cartridges and a map marked with old fur routes. Selene lingered near the back, thumbing through a crate of worn books. She pulled one free, leather cracked down the spine, and opened it. Her lips moved soundlessly across the page. When they stepped back into the snowlight, she tucked the book into her saddlebag. I want them to remember I tried, she said. They will, Assass said. They rode north, the land flattening and the trees thinning until the sky stretched wide and pale as bone. Tracks in the snow told them they were close. Deep wagon ruts, horse prints, small boot marks. Selene didn't speak again that day. But when they made camp, she passed him her bread ration without asking and sat beside him without looking away. When he rose to make the perimeter check, she reached for his wrist. Don't go far. I won't. She let go, but her hand lingered in the space between them for a long moment after. That night, when the fire had settled to embers, he draped his coat over her instead of his own shoulders. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She slept. He watched. The wagon sat crooked in the snow, one wheel sunk deep into a drift, the canvas pulled tight against a north wind. Smoke curled from a tin pipe at the back, faint and gray. Assass reined in just beyond a stand of bare willows, motioned for Selene to stay low. They dismounted together, boots crunching softly in the crusted snow. There were no voices. No movement but the slow flap of the wagon's oilskin cover. They waited. Then the door creaked open. A man stepped out, tall and narrow-shouldered, beard patchy, one hand gripping the edge of the frame like he'd been expecting trouble. His coat hung too big off his bones, and his eyes darted the way a man's do when he knows he's got more to answer for than he's ready to admit. Assass stepped forward. Looking for 2 children, boy and girl, heard they came through with a man claiming kin. The man's lip twitched. They ain't yours. They're hers. At that, the man's gaze shifted. Selene had stepped forward, slow but sure, her hands loose at her sides. She didn't speak. Just looked at him until his eyes dropped. He turned and shouted into the wagon. Few seconds passed. Then 2 small faces peeked out from behind the canvas, a boy with dark curls, a girl clutching a rag doll to her chest. Both stared wide-eyed at the stillness. Selene didn't move. Assass waited, jaw tight. The man cleared his throat. Their father owed me, said if he didn't come back they were mine to raise. Selene's voice was quiet. He's dead. The man shrugged. That don't change what he said. Asas stepped closer, hand resting on the butt of his rifle. You keeping them for debt. They're fed. Warm. Ain't that better than scattered in an orphan line? Selene walked past Asas, past the man, and knelt in the snow. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms. The children didn't hesitate. The boy ran first, burying his face in her coat. The girl followed, silent but fast, pressing close against her mother's side. Selene held them both, hands shaking but firm. The man's mouth tightened. They remember her now, but what about next season? You gonna keep 3 mouths fed through winter? Asas looked at him. We will. The man spat into the snow, but he stepped back. Won't stop you. Just don't come crying when the cold sets in. He turned and climbed back into the wagon, door snapping shut behind him. Selene didn't move for a long time. The children clung to her, their breaths quick and shallow against her neck. Then she looked up at Asas. They're heavier than I remember. We'll make camp close. Let them rest. They led the children through the willows to a patch of dry earth beneath a bluff. Asas built the fire slow, careful not to startle them. The boy sat beside Selene, head resting on her knee. The girl watched Asas's every move, eyes wide but curious. When the fire caught, Selene pulled the girl into her lap. They're smaller than they should be, she said. They'll grow. She looked across the flames at him. There's a part of me that doesn't know how to be their mother anymore. You don't have to know it all now. She nodded once, brushing hair from the girl's face. I used to sing them to sleep. They both liked the same hymn. You remember it. I remember every word. That night, the children curled beneath Asas's coat, tucked between their mother and the warmth of the fire. Selene sat close, her shoulder brushing his, her hand resting on his thigh as though she'd done it 1,000 nights before. She didn't ask him to keep watch, but when her gaze met his, soft and full in the firelight, he answered anyway. Sleep, he said. I'll watch tonight. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They stayed like that until the stars deepened overhead and the wind died down, the only sound the quiet breath of her children, safe again. The days turned deeper into winter, each morning colder than the last, but the children's cheeks began to flush with color, and their eyes steadied. Asas built the shelter from pine and river stone, a low-slung cabin near the bend of the Milk River, not far from where they'd found the children. He worked with quiet patience while Selene kept the fire and mended what she could. The girl Clara followed her mother's movements with fascination, while the boy, Nathaniel, took to Asas's side with the same quietness that lived in his bones. One afternoon, while Asas was fitting the last of the cedar shingles, Selene stood below with her sleeves pushed up, holding nails in her palm like she'd done it 100 times. She watched his hands move with sure rhythm, then said, You always know what to do with your hands. He looked down at her. They've known more use than grace. She smiled, but it was the kind that came slow, like sun through morning fog. You've been kind to me. I didn't do it for thanks. I know. She brushed her thumb over the curve of her wrist. That's why it matters. That night, the children fell asleep huddled beneath quilts Selene had stitched from old flannel shirts and flour sacks. Asas sat by the fire, working a new grip onto the stock of his rifle, while Selene braided Clara's hair with fingers that no longer trembled. He never called them by name, she said. Just boy or girl. I used to think maybe it wouldn't matter, that they were too young to remember. But Clara has started saying her name out loud again, like she's trying to feel it in her mouth. He set the rifle down. She'll keep it. It's hers. Selene looked over at him, eyes catching the firelight. You've given them more than I could have asked for. They're your children. They're ours now, she said. He didn't answer right away. He reached across the space between them and took her hand in his, rough palm closing over her fingers like it had always belonged there. The first thaw came in late March. Ice drifted down the river in slow sheets, and geese flew low across the sky. One morning, Nathaniel brought Asa a pine cone and said it looked like a bullet. Asa turned it over with a solemn nod and tucked it into his coat pocket like it was something sacred. Selene stood in the doorway watching them, arms crossed beneath her shawl. "He talks more to you than he does to me. He knows you're his mother, I'm just a curiosity. You're steady," she said. "That's all he's ever needed." On a quiet morning not long after, Selene took Asa's hand and led him down to the riverbank while the children napped. The ice had cleared, and the water moved slow and glassy. She took off her boots, stepped into the shallows, and laughed when the cold bit her ankles. "I used to do this with my sister. We'd pretend we were crossing into new land, like we were explorers." He watched her, the way the wind caught her dark hair, the way her shoulders no longer curled inward. "You still are." She came back to him, barefoot, skirts damp at the hem. "I never thought I'd feel like myself again." "You're more than you were," he said. She touched his face, palm resting against the line of his jaw. "I want to stay." "With me," she nodded. "With you, with them." "Here, if it means I don't have to keep running." He wrapped his arms around her and held her like he knew what it cost her to ask. "You're not running anymore." They married in the spring beneath the cottonwoods behind the cabin. A preacher from the next settlement came with a weathered Bible and a voice that cracked when he sang the hymn Selene chose. Clara wore a crown of woven sage, and Nathaniel handed over the rings carved from bone and silver. Afterward, Selene stood with her hand in Asa's and said, "I never knew peace could feel this still." He kissed her then, slow and without hesitation, the kind of kiss that made the world settle quiet around them. That summer, the children helped plant rows of potatoes and beans while Asa built a smokehouse beside the cabin. Selene began teaching Clara to read from the book she'd taken from the trading post, and Nathaniel carved animals from driftwood he found along the river. They slept with the windows open and the sound of crickets carrying through the trees. In late August, a letter came from Selene's sister in St. Louis, carried by a trapper who'd passed through. Her sister had seen something in a newspaper, a mention of a woman's name and 2 missing children found. She wrote to say she was sorry, and that if Selene ever wanted to come home, her door was open. Selene read the letter by candlelight, then folded it and tucked it into a drawer. "This is home," she said. In the fall, Asa built a cradle out of pine and lined it with wool. Selene ran her fingers along the smooth edges and whispered, "It'll be different this time." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hand resting over hers on the wood. "Everything's different now." They spent the winter snowed in, telling stories by the fire, teaching the children how to mend and carve, reading aloud from books they borrowed one by one from passing travelers. The days were short, but the nights were full. Selene gave birth in early April, in the quiet hours just before dawn. Asa stayed beside her, holding her hand while Clara and Nathaniel waited outside, hushed and still beneath the stars. The baby came red and strong, her cry filling the cabin with something fierce and alive. They named her Mercy. That spring, the hills turned green again, and the river ran fast with meltwater. Asa carved a wooden marker for the edge of the garden and etched all their names into it, deep and clean, so it would last through wind and rain. Selene stood beside him, her arm around his waist, watching the children chase each other through the tall grass. They never spoke about the place she came from again. They didn't need to. They had built something stronger than memory. They had built a life.